To morph an Overlord, left-click on the Select Larva button on the command card.
Shit. Alright, in all seriousness, I'm going to give this my best college try. For the mandatory sequel preface, this is the second part in a 3-part series, so if you're interested in Wings of Liberty or Legacy of the Void, the links will be in the description. I do also go over the rules and specifics more in depth in Wings of Liberty, but for a quick TLDR, I'm not allowed to make overlords or hatcheries, meaning that the supply we start with is what we have for the rest of the run. However, any mandatory mission prompts that give us supply, such as gaining control of our base after an introductory segment, don't count for very blatant reasons. Lastly, there is one niche outlier to all of this that'll be explained later, but let's just go ahead and make this singular overlord at the very beginning so we can get the passive-aggressive commenters who have nothing better to do in life typing away, and begin the run. So just like your average League of Legends player, as soon as the overlord is brought into this world, we're just going to go ahead and ignore its existence for the rest of its miserable life. For your sake and for mine, we're just going to pretend that we never gained control of this overlord by not making any units. As soon as the mission truly begins, I'm killing off all of my Zerglings and starting the mission with exclusively my starting drones. In practice, the overlord doesn't exist and was never made. Which means we actually have to micro a ton here because, as it turns out, 6 drones is just a little bit worse than an unending tide of Zerglings. So the first thing we have to do here is immediately kill off our spawning pool. Since we have no supply available because this overlord doesn't exist, dealing with the first few sentry bots is going to be our first big problem. So I decided the best way to go about that was to weaponize the few timed broodlings we get upon the spawning pool's death. However, their existence in this world isn't long, and that's not just because they get killed really quickly, I mean they just instantaneously perish within seconds. So what we have to do also is pull the sentry bots to the spawning pool over and over and over again until they camped out right here. Then we can go ahead and kill the spawning pool and let the broodlings do their work. Luckily they are pretty fast, so although they are short-lived, they do a decent chunk of damage and allow us to get our first batch of Zerglings. But that doesn't mean the mission is over, far from it. Since every Zergling is irreplaceable, that means we have to utilize the Zerg's inherent regeneration extensively. So a lot of this mission was a constant cycle of pulling a sentry bot, dragging it into a Zergling trap, surrounding it, then cycling the low health Zerglings with regenerated high health Zerglings over and over and over again. The only exception to this are the factories that we do need to surround to ensure that any sentry bots that are made are immediately killed, but other than that, it's just this. And if you're curious on the numerics, with this round, 1 sentry bot cannot kill a max health Zergling, and 2 can just barely manage to kill a single Zergling or drone if they both don't stop firing after it flees. Which is an unpredictable element of RNG, but it is still totally manageable. I want to say through the entire mission, there's about 3 or 4 instances where you need to pull 2 sentry bots. But other than that, you can just pull 1 at a time, and admittedly, this made Labrat an absolute chore to beat, but one that was pretty simple in practice, and by the end, with our extremely minimal losses, we were just able to surround the Eradicator and beat the mission with no issue. The mission afterwards is a no-build mission. As always, we aren't going to go into depth explaining it, as there's no reason to. But the mission after that, though, is when we unlock our crawlers, which are absolutely incredible. I've said this a few times, as there have definitely been a few challenge runs where I've had to use crawlers extensively, but the fact that you can use these buildings both defensively and offensively is absolutely massive for us. Just the ability to move around and route wherever the situation demands it is incredible. It's something that no other race in the campaigns can do, and it's something that we'll be utilizing constantly throughout the entire run. We do only have 26 supply, but that's more than enough to have our drones constantly mining and morphing themselves into different crawlers, and we're also going to be reinforcing them with Evo chamber walls. I explained it more in depth in the first video, again link in the description, but with how the ranged AI works, it's just a massive defensive boon for us. Since ranged units tend to skip out on target firing non-hostile structures to get a better concave on the real threats, it's pretty common for the AI to dogpile on top of the chambers to shoot down the crawlers, which is fantastic as that means a very limited amount of units at a time are capable of attacking the crawlers. What that allows us to do is take on attack waves in more dedicated segments, rather than all at once, which turns into a massive defensive advantage for us. And unlike Wings of Liberty and even Legacy of the Void, we're also able to turn that defensive advantage into an offensive advantage, as again, we're able to move around our crawlers wherever they may be required, with very few exceptions. Also, unlike Wings of Liberty, melee units are a bit more of a threat here since we don't have as many long-range units, and we won't have any good splash damage units until way later into the campaign. But we'll be covering how we deal with those more in depth in a future mission. Point is though, with how the AI interacts with these structures, this is one of the most bizarrely niche and incredible strategies you can utilize. And anytime I boot up another StarCraft challenge run, I find myself utilizing it constantly. Other than that though, I did actually plan my economy out way ahead so that, when the Brood arrives, I have virtually no drones mining and all of my supply is spent on queens instead. However, funnily enough, once the Brood arrives, your max supply increases to 200 anyways. Hell, even if this wasn't the case, the force that emerges from the incoming Nidus worms are actually decent enough on their own that they can just beat the mission anyways. So that's a little bit of a killjoy, but progress is progress and we're going to keep on keeping on. On to the planet selection. For this playthrough we're going to be doing Kaldir first as always. Unlike Wings of Liberty, we aren't going to do any individual missions and are instead forced into doing batches of missions. And Kaldir as a planet is pathetically easy, and the ability to have your evolved Zerg on Char and Xeris is just a massive benefit for Kaldir. And it's personal opinion, but I find myself using the units you gain through Kaldir way more than the ones you find on Char, so we're going Kaldir. We unlock the Roach on the first mission, and as always, it's an extremely easy mission that requires virtually no strategy. The flash freeze ensures that the Protoss are defenseless during it, so as long as you have any amount of army units capable of attacking the spires during the freeze, you can just AFK until the flash freeze arrives and, win. Even after losing 2 of my overlords like a complete idiot and crippling my max supply to 18 for no reason, the Zergling with adrenal glands actually does enough damage that they killed the last spire insanely quickly. It still wasn't even close at all. In fact, as long as you have crawlers defending your base, it's entirely possible to beat this entire mission with only drones. It is that trivial. The next mission, though, is just Crawler Central. And I believe this is the only mission in the entire campaign in which you can gain access to a second hatchery. And what that means for us is, we're never going to have more than one base in this entire playthrough. Because unlike the Terrans Command Center, we don't have the option to move our base around. And long-distance mining with drones is debatable at best. So our economy for the entire run is gonna be pretty bad. But I guess for now this does help out with the mission a bit. Actually, scratch that, I'm gonna play through the mission again without it because I'm not gonna let dumb commenters tell me that I cheated because I gained an entire 2 supply on one mission that I didn't need it in. So, no more base. Anyways, this mission is also pretty linear and not all too exciting. All we have to do is have as many drones as we can spare gathering minerals. Then we morph them into spine and spore crawlers whenever feasible, and we just cycle that process over and over and over again. And for the bonus objectives, Kerrigan is more than capable of killing them on her own, but it is a little bit faster with some crawlers and appropriate kiting. But that's pretty much it. The forces that the Protoss send out aren't really strong enough for crawlers to ever have a problem, and even if they were, we can just mobilize them into a more ideal position to minimize our losses. As it stands currently though, it's entirely unnecessary and all we have to do is AFK. Afterwards though, we gain access to our first Zerg evolution, in which we're going for the Raptorling. I mentioned it earlier, but Zergling damage with the Adrenal Glands upgrade is already insane, but add in the Raptorling jump to mitigate their slower speed, as well as the extra damage they gain from the mutation, and it's an entirely different ballgame. There's also another upgrade we'll get in just a minute that turns them into even deadlier killing machines, but we'll get there when we get there. On to the next mission though, it is a hero mission, but it's the only one in the entire game where you actually can gain increments of supply over time. So although it is in the rules that I can evolve my Broodmother to take advantage of that, I was curious with my newfound Zergling mutation if it's possible to beat this mission with only 6 supply, and sure enough, it actually is. You do need help from this Ursidon to stun groups of enemies near the last objective, but other than that, it's actually really easy. Just spam that Zergling button and run in circles until the cows come home. Afterwards though, we gain access to another Zerg evolution, this time for the Roach. And for this playthrough we're going with the Corpser strain. I'm actually a huge advocate for the Corpser because although they don't scale into the late game well, while the Vile Roach does, I don't really find myself using roaches all too often in the late game anyways. And with the Hydraulic Bile upgrade, which heavily increases the roach's damage against light targets, I find that in the early missions, the Corpser can generate legions of roachlings even in incredibly low numbers. Also, I find that the upgrade scaling is surprisingly great, with the Roach benefiting from armor and ranged upgrades as always, and the Roachlings benefiting from the armor upgrades, so it's sort of a double dip on Carapace upgrades. And since we're already not spending a whole lot on army units anyways, because we kind of just can't, I almost always get upgrades extremely early in missions, so the scaling is vastly appreciated. All these qualities are already showcased immensely well in the next mission, Domination. These areas with lots of Zerglings or infested Terrans are absolutely insane for us. And with as little as 4 roaches, I was able to consistently generate 30 to 70 roachlings, which absolutely flooded my enemies. However, just like Rendezvous, despite my best intentions to keep my supply nice and balanced to set up a final assault, the second I beat the first main objective, my maximum supply just goes up to 200 anyways, and the force I get is more than capable of completely obliterating Zagara with no issue. Darn. Oh yeah, I should also probably mention, we now have access to improved Overlords. So this is that one niche exception I mentioned in the intro and in the last video. This upgrade makes Overlords morph instantly and generate 50% more supply. That first part is entirely pointless and will obviously never be utilized, but the second part is actually immense for us. To put that into perspective, let's say you have 8 drones mining and you start with 2 Overlords. With a hatchery you're looking at a pretty measly 18 starting supply, which with 8 drones means you only have 10 supply available to build army units with, which is obviously really bad. However, throw in improved Overlords and now you're up to 26, which means the amount of army supply you can utilize increases from 10 to 18, which is nearly double the usual army supply we would have available. and it only scales better and better over time, with more missions starting you off with more and more overlords. And one other upgrade we'll talk about way later. On to the next mission though. The start did take 1 or 2 tries to get down because I had to immediately rush upgrades while ensuring that I lived, which was a bit tricky, but after a few attempts I was able to get rocking and rolling. And upon doing so, the corpsers shined yet again. They were a lot more expendable here than usual since there's more units to punish roaches, namely Thors, siege tanks, banshees, and bunkers, but even with those limitations, they were able to snowball a few patrols into massive waves. And with those boosts, I was able to clear out all the forces by the remaining Scourge Nests. And since I was intentionally timing my Scourge Nests to only be awakened at the last second, they spawned the 4th Gorgonin at such a time that I was capable of spreading creep to the remaining 3 Scourge Nests, and then activate them all in one fell swoop and beat the mission before any of the triggered attack waves could do a thing. The next mission though, we gain access to Kerrigan's 3rd active ability, and trust me when I say it is massively appreciated, as clearing through this map, even with 52 supply, can be a complete nightmare. We have the choice between Spawn Banelings and Wild Mutation, and although Spawn Banelings may be better when we unlock the Baneling mutation, I found that Wild Mutation was absolutely exceptional in sieges when combined with certain units, such as Frenzy Hydralisks and Adrenal Gland Zerglings, since those upgrades will stack on top of each other, which makes their damage output... I mean, fucking look at this. This is 1 Zergling. Go ahead and imagine an entire group of them. And also remember that this isn't just for burst damage, they also gain 200 shields, which means a small group of Raptorlings is more than capable of annihilating entire attack waves within seconds. And if that sounds like a terrifying prospect, it's because it is. So for the most part, we're going to be using a decent chunk of units here. I found that an incredibly bizarre comp of aberrations, zerglings, roaches, and hydras could all stack on top of each other, which made Wild Mutation not just affect a small squadron, but literally my entire army. Which meant clearing out the entire map went pretty fine all things considered, albeit pretty costly because I was sustaining damage after Wild Mutation was over. That was until this attack wave completely caught me off guard and completely annihilated my forces and my economy. So this point was kind of a soft reset. And with our inability to take a forward expansion, my resources were really starting to dry up, which means I needed to ensure that whatever units I made were as efficient as possible. So for that, I went with a huge mass of Hydras and Corpsers. With Frenzy and Wild Mutation, the Hydras dealt an insane amount of damage, while the shield protected them from any incoming burst. All the while, the Corpsers were generating their Roachlings, which added to their combined survivability. Although our first assault didn't beat the mission, it did set us up to be in a prime condition to finish it off with another big push. So I went ahead and killed off Kerrigan so she can respawn with full energy and full health. Pretty much remaxed on Hydras, and with minimal resistance we're just able to right-click the last objective and move forward to the next planet, Xeris. If you somehow weren't convinced that Wild Mutation was exceptional yet, Mutalisks will probably change your mind. Since you can easily stack all of your flying units right on top of each other, you can easily give every single Mutalisk you have the benefits of Wild Mutation. And again, although I said it last mission, when you look at Wild Mutation not as a super buff to a select squad of units, but an entire army-wide super buff, it's a little bit broken, and the Mutalisks proved to be incredible for it. And in this mission in particular, I was able to greet up to 23 Mutalisks by killing all but one of my drones for harvesting, and sure enough, Giving an entire, albeit small army consisting of frail, speedy attackers with ricocheting attacks, 200 free health, and double attack speed was just as dangerous as it sounded. So every time I popped this ability, my mutas just dealt completely absurd damage. Although J. Allen Brack was admittedly pretty resistant to them due to his high armor and health, yet again Evolution Chambers continued to be the GOAT of all time and stunlocked his AI into having an aneurysm until his inevitable death. What a structure. Anyways, the next mission sucked. Even with 74 supply, with this obviously being a defense mission with a set time limit, you're not able to be as proactive with that supply as you would hope, and hence you can't really mitigate the very real problems that this low of a supply count has in the late game. So for this, I needed to utilize 4 units. Swarm Hosts, Corpsers, Mutas, Queens, and I guess Crawlers, but those were kind of a given. And also that's 5, I said 4, so yeah. Ignoring my scripting problem, I will say I mentioned way earlier that we're going to have a dedicated defense plan against melee units, and you're going to see that right here. So if you have a small opening available, instead of the melee units meleeing the walls like they normally would, what they'll do is run through that opening to attack the forces on the other side, which ranges from suicide to a genuine benefit with units like the Corpser Roach. Assuming the Corpsers weren't corpsing away, the melee units also wouldn't be able to do any damage because the locusts that the Swarm Hosts spawn have to funnel through the walls as well. So, really the big problem on this mission was assuring that things actually died. These ramps didn't help too much and ended up actually just being a sheer disadvantage for us, as you really don't have a whole lot of space to plop down spine crawlers alongside the Evo chambers. And due to their limited numbers, units actually lived for quite a while. That's a huge problem because of a few units, namely the Primal Ultralisks that are definitely more than happy to ignore the norm and lack my Evo chambers. Which, with my limited supply in army units, made me extremely vulnerable. So especially with the southern and western entrances, my choices were either just naturally having way less active spine crawlers, or attempting to hold their positions way further out, which does not work. Those positions are so far out that reinforcing them is virtually impossible. So we just have to deal with the terrain being a complete ass. Also, if you're curious as to why mutas were thrown into the mix here, they only really served one goal that I, admittedly, diverted way too many resources into, and that's killing the bonus objective. With the Sundering Glaive upgrade and proper spreading, you only need about 7 mutas in total to kill the Tyrannosaur. And although they did help with the Primal Guardians that were sent out, that's pretty much where their usefulness ended, and our queens are already doing pretty fine against foes. But with 74 supply, even with tons of crawlers and proper walling, the last attack wave did kill me quite a few times. So I had to go back and reload an old save to time my locust cooldowns in such a way that they'll be on the offensive when the last attack wave starts. And I'm also going to bring along some Corpsers so they can hopefully generate a legion of Roachlings, and it sort of worked, but even then the tidal wave ended pretty quickly and my southern and western positions were suffering heavy losses. However, that very short-lived Roachling wave gave me just enough time to reinforce my units lost with enough cannon fodder to hold off until the Queen awakened. If this attack wave lasted even 30 seconds longer, I don't think I would have won, and I probably would have just had to restart the entire mission. But luckily, Blizzard, yet again, made sure that the very last scary attack wave spawns in before it's really able to deal any damage. And I was able to beat the mission, as well as the next mission since it's a hero mission, and we got ourselves some more upgrades. For the Swarm Host, we went with the Pressurized Glands since it's really the only choice here. And for the Hydralisk evolution, we went with the Impaler, because although the Lurker is better in theory with their AoE damage, their range is just so low that I can never reliably field them. The Impaler has a lot higher range, and immensely high single target damage is something that isn't to be scoffed at. And also, we're going to go ahead and skip past these two missions for blatant reasons. For the Swarm Host, we went ahead and got the Carrion Strain, exclusively because of the previously discussed Wild Mutation synergy. And for Kerrigan abilities, we ended up going Kinetic Blast, Chain Lightning, Wild Mutation, Improved Overlords, Malignant Creep, and Fury. Malignant Creep, or as I so elegantly called it, Malignant Creep, isn't a mainstay because Twin Drones is just absurdly OP, but Fury in Chain Lightning turns Kerrigan into an AoE minigun that is more than capable of taking on small attack waves, even without abilities. Which is fantastic for us because usually spawn banelings would hold that mantle, and we really would prefer Wild Mutation if possible. So with that, we can go ahead and move on to the next mission. And this is where we need to talk about the Infestor because it's kind of a problem. Remember the Hive Mind Emulator? Yeah, now go ahead and imagine the Hive Mind Emulator, but remove the race restriction, meaning it can mind control almost anything. Get rid of the fact that it's obviously not a structure, so it can move anywhere, while burrowed by the way. Give it a way to regenerate its energy almost instantly with pretty much no downside if you plan on it. Give it a massive AoE stun that does a decent amount of damage, and also, just like the Hive Mind Emulator, mind-controlled units take up no supply. They are completely broken. And do you know what else is now? Kerrigan. At this level, with certain abilities, she's, without hyperbole, able to solo entire missions. In fact, the one and only mission she's not able to solo at this point is Phantoms of the Void. And that's literally only because she's not in it. So, let me go ahead and answer something real quick. Excluding this one bastard Overlord, the answer to the video title is now yes. There is nothing stopping me from spawn camping a bunch of factories or starports with infestors and mind controlling dozens, if not over 100 Thors, Goliaths, siege tanks, Vikings, battle cruisers, science vessels, banshees, or any of those units in just winning. Likewise, there is absolutely nothing stopping me from just running Kerrigan through the entire map and soloing the entire game with exclusively her. So, I genuinely can't make the ending of this video interesting, because if I just totally ban Kerrigan and Infestors, I'm pretty sure this mission is just straight up impossible, but all the other missions would just devolve into really boring AFK strategies. Utilizing a combo like Swarm Host, Viper, Crawler, Impaler, we effectively can hold out against any attack wave forever. And trust me, as much as I'm sure it's fun and interactive, I don't know if you want to see me take down an entire Terran stronghold over the course of 2.5 hours because I'm only able to comfortably field 5 Swarm Hosts. And how do we feel about allied units? When I get to Reckoning, do I just AFK and weaponize Raynor by surrounding him with a bunch of structures and unleashing his wrath every 3 hours or so? How do we feel about Dahaka? Do I ban him alongside Kerrigan? What about Stukov? What about Zagara? How do we feel about exploits? How do we feel about... You get the point. It is just entirely impossible to make this a cool finish. So as much as I hate to say it, I'm not going to waste your time pretending that the end of this was a real laborious endeavor that took tons of hours to plan and execute. On Infested, I used the Muta Wild Mutation combo to slowly whittle away at the Dominion forces alongside the infested Terrans. On Hand of Darkness, I disabled Kerrigan from existence after she killed the first hybrid and utilized Infestors to mind control everything with only 2 queens and 2 roaches as backup. I went Viper for the Mutalisk mutation just due to its ability to enable AFK strategies. Hand of Darkness had an interesting start where I had Kerrigan AFK so I could start out with Leviathan, but other than that I just made Impalers which shredded the incoming hybrid, with only a few Spore Crawlers to deal with the air. Planetfall was more uninteresting nonsense with Swarmhost spam until the first main objective was complete, and the second objective was just a really interesting F2A move. Death from Above was another, so Turtlefest until I was able to kill these 2 missile turrets, and Reckoning I just soloed with Kerrigan. Woo. GG easy. Isn't it evident which child of the 3 I hate the most? Anyways, I apologize that this was a relatively sour finish, but I assure you, Legacy of the Void will actually have a lot more of an interesting one. Hell, I think the first 3 missions account for a third of this video's total runtime. So, again, I have to do the sequel prompt and outro. If you're interested in Wings of Liberty or Legacy of the Void, links to both will be in the description, and I'm going to assure you that they're both way more interesting than this. And as for Patreon shenanigans, in the last video I said all of your names really fast because you're getting 3 times the credit in a single day of uploads. But this time I'm going to hit you with a new twist. Saying all of your names at the same time with the power of editing magic, and turning you into a Lovecraftian spell of monetization. So, thank you so much to my cast, and I hope you enjoyed that little comic antic. As always, if you're interested in supporting the channel, unlocking exclusive bug videos, commissioning terrible but sometimes not the worst somehow MS Paint commissions, and your name read out loud in varying degrees of monotone, the link will be on screen and in the description. Thank you for everything as always, I can't say that enough. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and take care of yourself. If you don't abide by this bidding, I will go to your house and force you to eat coal. See you around, I guess.